Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 396 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, coming to you with co-host James Dodds. Back to you for another week. As we started last week, we started stepping through the phases of training, and we're going to be drilling down, double-clicking on each one of them. Last week, we talked about the base phase, the first phase of the work. This week, we're talking about the aerobic strength phase. What's involved? What do you do? What are your guiding principles? What are the types of workouts? We're going to drill into it, and I'm excited about that. But first, wanted to say hello. Good to see you, sir. And also just recognize and acknowledge the window of time that we're in. We're not talking about the taper phase yet, but for a lot of people, they're starting to get into their taper phase, if not already there, for spring marathons that are coming. Boston, the Boston runners I coach, they did their last big long run this past weekend. Eugene and London runners have their last big long runs coming up this weekend. All those races are coming third and fourth weekend in May. But there's others, Glass Cities, there's Jersey City. And so a lot of people are in that phase of training where you wind things down a little bit, bring down volume, bring down a little bit of intensity, prepare the body and the mind for the big day upcoming. And so I just thought we'd take a minute just to throw out some reminders on the taper phase and things to be thinking about as they put the finishing touches on their blocks.
First couple of thoughts that come to mind is don't start anything new. Be aware that your mind may go a little bit crazy just because of pattern interruption, pattern change. Humans love patterns, so you break it, and we've just been pushing really intensely. So it can feel like a pendulum swing. And to prevent that pendulum swing feel is one of the reasons why we stair step down, not just psychologically, but physiologically as well. So in some spirit, I would say, don't try anything new, and don't run with brand new ideas because your mind will be going a little bit crazy. I'd also say, take it just as serious as any other phase of training, even though it's a reduction in volume and we're coming out of the qualities. Like some of the qualities might still feel like decent work, solid work. I usually in the first week of the taper still do speed work. And so that one's still a pretty toasty workout, if you will. But the spirit I'm saying is take it serious, not take it aggressively. Those are different words. So this is an opportunity as you're coming down, just like a workout, like you hit a workout really hard, but you do that 1 to potentially 3 mile cool down where you're letting everything settle in the body. Consider that a microcosm to what we're doing here with the taper. We're coming out of that intense work, letting the body heal itself. So you might feel niggles and naggles, and that's really the body repairing itself. Be wary that your brain will be a little bit all over the place. And now I'm starting to go into other tactics like focusing on race, but yeah. I want to stop and let you jump in.
Yeah, all good tips there. A couple of thoughts that come to mind for me are one, it's normal to go a little bit crazy, wild, whatever word you want to choose during the taper phase. We call it taper madness around here, where the mind starts playing tricks on you. And I think there's this expectation for more experienced marathoners, perhaps, if that's you, that somehow that dissipates or goes away because you've done it a bunch of times. And I can tell you from the experience of someone who's lined up for 22 marathons, it doesn't. It's always there, and that's normal and okay. But I do think you do become better at dealing with those feelings and emotions because you're going to have anxiety, you're going to have fears, you're going to have nerves. Those are normal parts of the body basically telling you that, hey, that there's a big thing coming. Mm-hmm. And you want those responses because that's flight or fight stuff. That's the body basically getting ready to go do the big thing. And so then you just have to learn how to manage that extra energy and how to take those thoughts and convert them from anxiety, fears to something that's more productive. One of the ways I tell people to do that is to associate with the race. Recognize when you're having those kind of crazy moments, acknowledge it, set those thoughts aside, and instead of lingering on the anxieties and the fears, shift those thoughts to something productive, which is race preparation in some form. Visualizing, preparing your plans, studying the course, setting up logistics for you for the pre-race period, whatever it may be, channel that extra energy into preparing your mind instead of letting it wander to the crazy things. So that's one thing that I mentioned. And then, the other is just kind of the tactics of how do you pull back. And one thing, you said don't do anything new. And the other thing, the corollary to that to me is also keep doing what you've been doing, in a sense that keep your routine.
Mm-hmm.
We are big on keeping the routine. So yes, you're going to pull back the volume. You're going to start to pull back the intensity, but you still want to keep the normal days. All of your normal days of running, you're going to keep. And the recommendation I use, sometimes you'll hear people talk about percentages and cutting back percentages. I think that can be confusing math. So the easy math I tell people is cut back 1 mile per run per week in the taper phase. And for marathoners, that's a 3-week process. Typically for half marathoners, I recommend 2. For anybody who might be doing a 5K or 10K, you could probably get away with a 1-week taper. But pull back 1 mile per run per week, following those same guidelines as you go, but keep all your normal runs so that you maintain the routine and the body doesn't freak out too much on you. So those are my 2.
Yeah. And at the risk of camping out a little long, I think it'd be fun.
Take the risk. It's
all
okay.
right. What would, how has it shown up for you? I'm thinking of 2 stories in my head.
Okay.
So I'm like, but how is it manifested for you? What's your flavor of taper madness? And has it changed, or is it usually the same?
I feel like I've had all forms of it, and you just, again, you become better at recognizing it. The one that I struggled with early on in my career was the feeling like I was out of shape because you're pulling back volume, you're pulling back intensity, and the body's kind of in this repair mode to get you ready for race day. So what happens typically is you feel a little off, a little funky, not sharp during the taper period, kind of like you feel during a down week. And that is counterintuitive that you would be able to feel that way and then still go perform on race day. But that's kind of the way it works. So early on in my career, that I would let that freak me out. I'd be doing marathon pace 2 weeks out. A common workout that we like in that window is 2 times 2 miles or 2 to 3 times 2 miles at marathon pace. And in that type of workout, marathon pace might feel hard for you or feel harder than it should. And I would let that kind of freak me out. So that's a flavor, but I feel like now that I'm experienced, I can say, okay, I can call it what it is. I'm like, well, that's just my body preparing itself for race day. Don't let that throw you off. Right. And so I no longer worry about that feeling. Doesn't mean the feeling isn't there at times, but I no longer worry about it, because to me, that instead of that signaling I'm out of shape, to me now it signals in my head, okay, that's just your body preparing itself to go. And so I think that's what it is. It's like taking these feelings you might have and using it as different cues. If we have that feeling, instead of if making you feel like you're out of shape, instead switching the cue. It's like, no, that's a cue that says I'm getting ready. Or, a common one I've dealt with is just the fear and the anxiety of, is my goal too big? Whatever the race is, it's like, is my goal too big? Am I prepared to go tackle the big thing that I put in front of me? And there's a lot of fear and anxiety that comes with that. And so, you can let yourself drown in those thoughts, or you can flip it and say, well, if my goal wasn't big enough, then I wouldn't be scared at all. And that's not what I want. That's not what I signed up for. I signed up for this kind of fear and anxiety because I want to take the big challenging goal and see what I can do when I try to go tackle it. So again, I think you can take some of these negative thoughts or these spiraling thoughts and just switch the message that it actually sends your brain, and let those just cue different thoughts instead of the ones that are going to make you spiral.
Yeah, I smiled when you talked about the one, is my goal too big? Because I had that manifest one time in the way of a dream. Well, it wasn't a dream. I was awake and I was at a hotel,
A daydream?
and it was a cheap hotel, and there was like this moldy looking like water damage on one of the on part of the ceiling. And I remember my imagination being like, what if like that grows through the night and a pipe burst and it just like completely destroyed. Like the roof caves in on me, and I knew it was just fear of what was to come, and I almost wanted an excuse.
Yeah.
And I remember my brain at the time, this is really random, but it was when Johnny Manziel was in college, and it was before all of his controversies came out. So the whole world's watching him thinking, this wonderful kid, he's so brave. He doesn't just he doesn't want to avoid that which is to come. He wants to march into Alabama and bring it to them. And I remember my head circling between these extremes of like, how do I harness that courageous spirit of like, I want to go into the lion's den and hunt it. But within the same like vision and same thought and same moment, I'm feeling I kind of want the ceiling to cave in and just destroy me. So I have a good excuse as to why I didn't have to show up.
I don't have to do it. That's interesting. I had this very recent when I was doing the Moab stage race, and I found out after the second day that I was the lead male. So I was going into the last day with a top spot in the podium to defend. You know, as you know, I finished third, so I got beaten by two guys. Fair play. They were better than me on the last day, but I had this irrational fear as I was letting the nerves settle into the pressure of that spot as I was trying to go to bed the night before, that I had this irrational fear that I was going to like tear a muscle, like rip a quad off my bone or hamstring off my, tear a hamstring or something like that. Because I'm sitting here thinking, well, I've run 2 days hard. I've got, 38 miles in my legs of racing, and I've got another hard day where I'm trying to hold on to the lead. What if I overdo it and I tear a muscle? And I just had these vivid, extreme images of like ripping the quad off the bone, which was completely irrational, but also, felt real in the moment. You're like, well, I don't want to overdo it either.
Yeah.
And so, but that's what I was facing. And those were real nerves and real thoughts and feelings. I'm like, okay, that's not productive. Let's channel it into thinking about a good mantra for tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I also like to think of it as your brain preparing itself for just how much pain it's willing to endure, right? Like it's like, I will go there.
I'll go there.
I will rip the
irrational.
flesh.
I'm not going to rip a muscle off the bone.
Yeah.
So anyway, look, it can be crazy for you out there.
All that to say.
And it's normal. It is normal. You are not alone. It is something that every person faces, regardless of what their goal is and what they're trying to tackle or the level or the experience. I mean, elite, middle of the pack, back of the pack, everybody faces these things. So you're not alone, but just acknowledge it. Don't beat yourself up over it. I always say that. It's like, these are normal things. And then just shift the thinking. We'll talk about it quickly, but we were talking about it on our Q&A. I don't know if it was this past week or the week before. Would have been this past week, I guess, because I think I missed the week before. But somebody asked about taper and how to handle these things on our Friday Q&A, which, by the way, if you get on Instagram Live, 2 p.m. Central on Friday, we're there to answer all of your questions. And somebody asked about the taper and how to deal with it. And I talked about two types of strategies I like to employ: associative strategies and dissociative strategies. Associative strategies are the ones I already talked about, which is associating with the race, channeling those negative or anxious thoughts into preparation, working on your plan, memorizing your plan, prepping nutrition, whatever it may be. And then if that doesn't work, there's dissociative strategies, which is how do I dissociate from it so that I'm not thinking about it by watching a Netflix show, reading a book, catching a movie, hanging out with friends that won't remind you of the impending race, whatever it might be. Dissociate from it and distract yourself so that time flies and you kind of are able to set those anxious thoughts aside for a moment. So a couple of quick hit tips on the taper. We will spend a whole chapter on it later in coming episodes, but I thought this was an appropriate time to hit that since we're getting close for some people.
I think we both feel it. I certainly feel it. Like I'm starting to mix Eugene and Boston course profiles in my head, and I have to be very into, like right now in the coach's seat because we have so many racing in April.
Yeah.
And there's still Cap 10K and speed track. Yeah. So I think we're both feeling it.
Yeah, we're in it. And as a coach, I don't want to say it's an anxious time because I don't really feel anxiety over other people's races. I think what I feel is a heightened sense of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, okay, they're dialing in, I need to be dialed in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of have this heightened sense of like, all right, it's time to be on it, like they're going to be on it, helping them. And so you just kind of feel that things are getting a little more serious.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you got to make sure you're pushing people in the right directions and giving them the best chance to go do what they want to do. So I'm feeling that for sure.
Yeah. And great language too.
All right. Well, there you go. That's a quick hit on taper. Let's jump into today's actual phase we're talking about, which is the aerobic strength phase, also called just the strength phase.
Mm-hmm.
You'll often hear that term either around Rogue, or I think I hear that term probably more broadly. It's like strength phase of training, or this athlete's really been focused on strength. You'll hear commentators talk about that. And I think commonly when people hear the word strength, they don't think about aerobic strength. They think about muscular strength. And so I think there's a little bit of, I don't want to call it confusion, but a little bit of uncertainty about what does it mean when we're talking about strength? Are we talking about muscle strength? Are we talking about aerobic strength? And decidedly, we're talking about aerobic strength.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wanted to just start by talking about what does that mean? What is aerobic strength? What does it mean to have strength in an aerobic sense? Because I think all can understand what it means to have strength in a muscular sense.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you explain that?
Well, in the same way that we've talked about all this easy pace running and slow it down and what you're doing in a base, because we're telling people that you're building up your engine. So there's like a capacity that's built. And then inside that, there's a capacity to run at really hard efforts while it's still aerobic. So as opposed to anaerobic, where we go, we have so much lactate production that we actually are now basically going to overcook. And so that's really, really fast-paced work. But I think of the middle gears. I think of working the middle gears and building the strength to run at harder paces while still feeding the muscles oxygen. It's your maximal output while it's still in a, quote, aerobic effort or oxygen-driven effort.
Yeah, that touches on some of the science of what's happening. If I were to try to just use different vernacular, different words to help people understand it, what I like to say is aerobic strength is another word for, or another phrase for endurance or staying power, kind of your ability to sustain. And obviously in our sport of distance running, really mile and beyond, you need that staying power. It's kind of interesting sometimes when you think about athletes in a race, if you were watching a pro race in a 5K, for example, they talk about kick, and who is the athlete with the best kick? And that is describing an athlete's closing speed.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that sometimes gets covered, but not always, is what allows you to use that kick. What allows you to stay in the race long enough so that you can unleash that kick and have it at your disposal at the end of the race. What is that skill? That skill is aerobic strength or endurance. It's your ability to sustain a hard pace for longer periods of time and then still kick off of it.
Mm-hmm.
The stronger you are aerobically, the stronger you'll be able to finish races.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's other components as well. So that's a little bit of an oversimplification, particularly when you add the execution element in. But you want to build that staying power. And so that's what we're doing in the aerobic strength phase, is your ability to sustain slightly uncomfortable paces for longer periods of time. And then on top of that, obviously we get into the race specific phase where you dial in specificity around the race. But this is really kind of setting the table, getting you ready for that more race specific work. So endurance, staying power, that's what we're trying to build in the aerobic strength phase. Distinctly, that means that in general, we're not asking you to go to the limit a lot in the strength phase. We're asking you to stay away from the limit or edge, so to speak. And instead of trying to press further towards the limit, rather hang out and try to make wherever you are feel even easier and more comfortable. And that is a vector of improvement that I don't think people often think about, especially I think in an American exercise culture. It might be different in other parts of the world, but in an American exercise culture that says, if you're not hurting, it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
That's our American exercise culture. And in this phase, it's really kind of different. It's like, you might be hurting a little bit. We don't want you to hurt more. We actually want you to try to make that hurt go away.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the magic of the aerobic strength phase, which is, it takes a little bit to wrap your mind around that concept.
Mm-hmm. You almost want to think of it as like tolerance. Like I'm increasing my ability to tolerate higher stress loads. And what came to mind as you brought up kind of the American paradigm, sometimes I'll say old coaches, because I think there's a timeline aspect, and then there's also a geographical aspect. There's both at play there. And I had a conversation with an athlete recently. I was reminding her that, hey, like, when coaches say no pain, no gain, it's hard to affirm or reject that statement. Rather, it's how you define pain. I was like that screaming injury like pain, or going to the edge every single time you get to do a quality workout. That is a misapplication. And that's what you're saying here. I was like, the pain of no pain, no gain, I think is a more broader statement, especially for endurance athletes, i.e. the commitment of 20 to 24 weeks is the pain, right? The get up every single day, the 5 to 7 times a week, the long runs, that's a type of quote pain that in that sense, it's like, sure, no pain, no gain. Like if you're not willing to make sacrifices,
right.
If you're not willing to work hard, but by no means are we saying in these types of workouts, you must reach failure every single time. That's the misapplication of that type of statement.
Yeah. You'll appreciate this. I saw a tweet, X post, whatever, from Alan Cousins, who I've quoted on here before, endurance coach out of Colorado. He said, if someone tells you that you need to do high intensity interval training in order to improve your VO2 max, then you should jog slowly away, which I appreciate because of the layers of intelligence in that
yes,
short statement.
That was poetic. It was intelligent.
So yeah, you don't have to find the edge to actually get faster for the most part. And especially in this stage, if we're trying to set the table for the race specific phase, we want to do it by being measured, by being in control, by what we'll talk about later as being conservative even, because that's what this phase calls for, to actually improve and to capture the benefits of it fully. So what is it? It's endurance, it's staying power. Let's talk about some of the guiding principles of this phase. There's 3 that we call out in the book and we drill into in the book. By the way, I don't think I've mentioned, but this is chapter 11 for those that are following along with us. So kind of 3 guiding principles of the strength phase. One of them will come as no surprise because it's one of our guiding principles in general of our rogue training, which is that effort trumps pace in the aerobic strength phase. And I think that's both a message about intensity, but also a message about the science of what aerobic strength is and how you build it. Because as we just talked about from an intensity perspective, you want to kind of step away from the edge and find that staying power. And instead of finding more pain, you want to become more relaxed in this phase. And so that's about kind of the intensity part of the conversation. And then the other part of the conversation, which we've talked about in a whole episode on effort, is in order to build aerobic strength, which is primarily happening between aerobic threshold and anaerobic threshold or lactate threshold, that is very much an effort-based window of work. And yes, you can correlate paces to it, but more importantly, it's actually effort, especially on warm spring day like we've been having. If I tell somebody to do a aerobic threshold or lactate threshold workout today versus what we faced on Sunday morning, which was quite beautiful, then it's going to be 2 completely different paces. But if the effort's the same, the benefits will be the same. And so this is a commentary again about both intensity and also the science of how you get the most out of this phase.
It's crazy. Not only did I feel it on today's run, and now I was just trying to do an easy run. I wasn't even doing a quality, but tonight the quality workout for the teams locally, is ATLT
Yeah.
number 3, like the most advanced variation in this
Yep.
continuum. So yeah, I know that part of my talk track tonight based on dew point and based on temperature, and not just temperature and dew point in and of themselves, but the big swing that people are experiencing. I think sometimes athletes forget to consider that. Like if they're accustomed to kind of like smoothly humming along in the 50s and life's been beautiful for like 2.5 months, then all of a sudden on a random Wednesday, it's like, shoot, it's going to be like 78 with a dew point of 80. It's like, all right, my ATLT workout, typically tonight's the ATLT 3. In this particular variation, we're not saying this is the only workout for this window. We can get more broad in a second. But for tonight, I know that they're going to do 35 to 40 minutes of continuous running. And typically, I would say I want you to incrementally across that 35 to 40 minutes, start at AT pace and reach LT pace towards the final. And I want it to be smooth and kind of evenly divided. For most of the athletes tonight, they're going to end up just probably hanging out right at the AT pace if we were looking at it through the lens of pace.
Right.
And I'm going to talk to them about effort, but I always have to give them some little guiding pace to look at. And I'm telling them tonight, you know, if you were to like watch the heart rate chart, if the pace remains from left to right for 35 to 40 minutes, it never changes. That heart rate chart is going up and to the right. And I know without having a chart for them, lactate production and how it's building up across that 40 minutes is going up and to the right as well. So while the pace is remaining constant, given all the surrounding stressors in the environment itself, the rigor of the workout is increasing as we go on.
Yep. So the effort is increasing. Therefore, the benefit you're getting is changing as you evolve, in that case, from aerobic threshold towards lactate threshold. So yeah, effort is king. And, you know, it has a weather component to it. It has a stress in life and sleep component if you're just having an off day, and maybe the pace is there, maybe it's not, but if the effort's right, then you can claim the benefits. Could also be an altitude thing, as we've talked about. You know, I think that one's fairly commonly accepted as, hey, I'm going to go slower if I'm at elevation, but sometimes we don't always give ourselves that same grace with weather. But yeah, so we're trying to achieve physiological benefits by hitting certain effort zones, and the pace may or may not correlate exactly what you would expect. And the other part, I guess, of this point here is that I think we often get stuck in this paradigm of thinking that you have to be pinpoint with your pacing. You know, it's like, okay, well, you told me AT was 8-minute pace, so therefore I need to be running 8-minute pace. If I'm not running 8-minute pace, if I'm running 8:05, then I'm not getting the benefit that you're trying to give me with that given workout. And again, those are just example paces, pulling them out of the air. But the reality is, aerobic threshold is probably being developed within a range around 8-minute pace. Again, assuming, you know, consistent weather. And so you're not trying to be super precise with it. You're trying to find a rhythm that might fall within a pace range that allows you to essentially get the same benefit, whether you're one pace or maybe 5 seconds different, right? And so I think we also have to remind ourselves of that. And we articulate that often by telling people to operate within pace ranges and not within pinpoint paces. And it's, I think, both a way to recognize this point that, hey, I don't have to be as precise as I think, but also to give ourselves grace that if it is a little warm, I can slide to the slower end of that range and still be okay. So that's one way that this manifests, I think, in this range, is think about it a little bit more broadly. We're not trying to hit the nail on a head. We're trying to hit the side of a board that might be a 2x4, right? So,
well, and I like the word precision. That's helpful because it helps distinct, and especially using it early. Like as a coach, I think that's a great tactic to use that throughout the program to remind people there is a phase where I'm going to talk to you about precision. Now's not that time. And if you're an athlete training alone, I think thinking about that differentiator, like, oh, this is effort, this is general, this is broad strokes, this is like putting on a fine, like a big wide base layer of paint before I get into precision art. Like, aerobic strength is not about precision art. Like draw a contrast there.
Yep. So that's guiding principle 1, effort trumps pace. And, we might say it kind of always does, but in this case, especially guiding principle number 2 in this phase is you really want to be focused on control and relaxation. Control and relaxation. Smooth and relaxed is another way I like to say it when I'm shouting tips and missives to my group when they're running by on a Wednesday morning. Smooth and relaxed, because I want you to be thinking about that. It's about finding that groove, that rhythm, about, maybe your heart rate spiking a little bit as you get into it, but then you consciously, through relaxation, working on bringing it back under control so that it stays, if you're trying to keep a consistent effort, it stays relatively consistent. And that is such an art, and it's so much easier said than done. I can think about the moment I really, really clicked on this concept, and it was in a 10K race a long, long time ago. And I think I was, maybe 25 years old or so at the time. Was running a 10K, had a goal in mind, went out in that pace, followed a plan as you would, starting a little bit slower in the first mile, getting to your pace by the second mile, got to that pace by the second mile. And I was feeling like this is way too hard. Like I don't know if I could do another mile at this pace, much less 5 or 4. And in that moment, all I could do was just try to relax into it. And somehow, it kind of clicked for me. I went into this meditative space for a moment, really focused on relaxing the physical body while in motion, which is a weird thing to think about. And suddenly that pace in mile 2 went from feeling impossible to hold for a 10K to feeling easy and not easy, but effortless in a sense. In the third mile, I was able to then, carry that into the 5th mile and then close a strong 6th mile, got a PR in the day, beat the goal that I had wanted to beat. And while that's at 10K pace, which isn't an aerobic strength necessarily pace, it highlights a skill that I learned in that moment that I could then take into any workout and say, okay, when it feels too hard, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
I focus on this kind of meditative, relaxing, flow-oriented approach to running. And sometimes the analogy I use with this concept is if you're trying to throw a ball as far as you can or hit a golf ball as far as you can, if anybody's had that kind of feeling of trying to do anything as hard as you can, usually the harder you try to throw it, the shorter it goes. Mm-hmm. Especially if I think about a football or a baseball, the harder I try to throw those things, the shorter it goes. But when I relax and just kind of let it flow, where I don't feel like it's that hard or effortful, then suddenly it flies further than I would have expected, right? And I think the same is true with our running and learning that skill, being able to relax while moving at pace is really challenging. But if you can find it, that's where the magic is. Mm-hmm. And this is a phase where you want to be really, really focused on practicing that.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a ton to add to that, because I was getting visuals of like cars, and I was thinking of like, the middle gears going forever. That idea of like, I feel like more when I was in high school, that whole 55 saved lives. I know that was about like highway speeds and stuff, but I'm thinking like 55 always seemed like a number at which, my car back then could just cruise forever. You're not burning up the gas tank or anything. Nowadays, cars are so efficient, they can hum like that on the highway at 80. But it's still the same point. It's like if you're listening to your car and it feels like the car is screaming, you're not driving in that efficient window. So to me, I'm just thinking of visuals and metaphors, but I think you nailed it. It's if you can be relaxed, controlled, on top. I had a coach ask me one time when she was in her development phases and trying to split apart, brilliant questions always, but she had asked me about like a workout and was like, all right, so let's say you're, if you're doing 14 by 400 and on the 12th, you feel like you're overcooking. Do you slow down and get all 14, or do you call it there? Or do you hold the same pace and switch it to 200s? I'd say in scenarios like this, and 400s are probably a bad an example for the aerobic strength phase, but still, I mean, an example like this, I'm thinking I'd slow it down just a pinch, not any drastic swing, but I'd slow it down and go for the volume. Like I'd try to get the volume of the workout, even if I'm not, quote, like we said earlier, precise or hitting sexy, cool paces. Cause I'm whispering to myself. I love the words you use, staying power. I think that's the best. I like to visualize like miles 18 through 23 of a marathon, or like miles 8 through 11. It's sort of in that zone where you're like, I hope in those miles people feel controlled and on top of it, and that like the race isn't like falling out from under their feet at that point. Because if you're strong, relaxed, controlled, rhythmic in that window, then you're going to close. Like you have that ability. So that same feeling you get at those phases on good races, that's almost what you're mimicking here, that ability to stay at it at that middle gear as opposed to something extreme.
Yeah, and I think in any workout, at some point, you are faced with a choice, right? You get into the workout, you get to the theoretical pace or effort you're trying to hit, and once you're there, whether it be within a rep or maybe you get a rep done and you got more reps, you're faced with a choice. You can either push and find more edge, or you can say, all right, I'm here. Now I'm going to try to make this pace or effort feel as easy and comfortable as I can. And most of the time, I think our instincts are to push and find the next little edge.
Mm-hmm.
But in this phase, and really in many phases, I think it's more about saying, nope, not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to focus my improvement vector on making that pace or effort feel easier.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that and do it at will, it's like essentially you're able to call upon flow state at any point. And when it comes to half marathons and marathons especially, it's about that staying power. It's about efficiency. It's about burning as little energy for as long as possible so that you have something left at the end. And this is the skill that's going to get you there more than being able to grind it out when it gets really, really hard. Ultimately, both things can be a part of the equation when getting to your best race, but I think this is an under talked about and appreciated skill that is actually probably more important than being able to find and hang out at the edge longer.
Mm-hmm.
Hot take, perhaps, but that's where I'm at with it.
No, I don't think that's a hot take. I think that's dead on, because yes, it's a skill and you're right. And simultaneously you're working a physiological zone. So it's sort of double backed. It's like, one, we need to be in this zone so that we are very efficient at processing lactate. And there is a skill to learning to manage that. So I'm like, from two different angles, the physiological or the psychological, I'm like, I think you're dead on. Like you can't avoid, you have to learn this or you never get to your best.
Yeah. I mean, that's
racing self.
Black belt stuff. Okay. So that's second guiding principle of this phase, being controlled and relaxed and focusing there. The third is that we want you to still be conservative if ever in doubt. You know, I think I talked about this several episodes ago, but this idea of you having control over your peak. And there's part of that that's managed by the work itself, the X's and O's of the training. And I think part of it's also manifested by the psychological decisions you're making along the way, which send little cues to your subconscious and therefore your body that something big is coming or not. And in this phase of the work, because again, backing up for a second, you know, you've perhaps done 6-7 weeks of base training. You've established that aerobic foundation, that mileage foundation. Now we're stepping into 6, 7, 8 weeks of aerobic strength, but we've still got race specific phase, which would be 6 or 7 weeks, and then the taper. So you're at least 10 to 16 weeks out from race day in this window of work. And if you decide to go a little faster, to do the extra reps, to push a little harder at any point in this phase of work, those are cues that send your signals to your body to say, hey, we're actually getting ready for something. I got to start priming up, which then means we start to limit the peak we can reach down the road. But instead, if you say, nope, don't worry, body, we're cool. We're going to leave an extra rep out there. When in doubt, we're not going to go as fast as we think we could have, even if the effort was right. When in doubt, I'm going to cut a workout short if I don't feel like I feel great that day, if I'm sick or haven't had sleep or whatever it may be. And yeah, get in the work. Yes, be consistent. But when in doubt, if you're ever not sure, do more or do less. In this phase of work, the answer is do less. And again, that's hard to embrace. Now, again, some people, when I say that, they're like, well, you're not very rigorous about your training approach then. I'm like, well, have you seen any of my workouts? Because there's rigor, but it's just recognizing where that rigor should be focused, right? And in this phase of work, it's not about more, faster. It's about sustaining, base, consistency, the ability to keep doing the work week in and week out so that we can continue to stack that progressive load. So that when you are in that spot that matters in the race specific phase, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks out, then you are ready to then be precise and take the slightly more aggressive choice.
I have to jump in on the words stack that progressive load. I don't want anyone to miss it, because in the spirit of responding to that rebuttal where someone might say, your programs aren't that intense, it's like, please keep in mind, right now we're talking about how you approach the quality workouts in this phase. But in this phase, what else is going on? Don't lose what we've been talking about for months. Volume's still going up. Long runs are very long at this point. Medium long runs are strong and robust. They're nothing to laugh at. You're doing strides after those. If you're on your A game, you're still doing strength twice a week. And on this one particular day, we're trying to target a physiological zone that we're trying to develop for the subsequent stacking of bricks or progression overload. And so it's like, don't forget that, you know, even though right now in this 1 hour conversation, we're camping out on one single element, it's one single element nested inside of all of this rigor. And we're keeping all of that advancing at the same time.
Yep. I mean, it's also a nod to what's important, right? Still, in this phase of work, the consistency and the volume is actually more important than the quality work. Yes, we're doing quality. Yes, that's advancing and it's getting progressively more challenging, but it's still less important than the overall volume, than getting your long run to where it's going to be, than being able to max that out for as many weeks as you can, to being able to get to your max weekly volume sooner rather than later in the cycle so that you can get the benefits of all of that easy volume. So it's also just a nod to that. It's like quality is important, yes, but it's still not the most important thing. And it might never be, honestly, in our programming, but certainly in this one. And going back to the workout you were talking about, 35 to 40 minutes AT to LT, that is a progression that builds from 10-minute reps to 20-minute reps to 40-minute reps. And why do we give the range? We give the range so that if somebody's having a rough day, or maybe they didn't adapt to the weather as well as they should have, or adjust accordingly, that they can get through 35 minutes, stop and say, you know what, that's it for me today. Whereas somebody else might have everything going well, get to 40 minutes and stop there and feel like that was right for them today. Is the person who did 35 minutes worse than the person who did 40 minutes? No. Oh. Because they're doing what's right for them on the day, given all the variables at play. And so we're talking about these choices on the edges. And in this phase of work, if you're ever not sure, should I do the extra rep? Should I go 10 seconds faster? Should I skip this day of running if I'm feeling sick? I mean, the answer is always take the conservative choice. Okay, so that's kind of guiding principles. Now let's talk about a little bit more of the specifics of what we are accomplishing in this aerobic strength phase. I want to flip the order of how we have it listed here. Let's start with volume, because we just talked about that. And I want to make sure that it's clear that the priority is still volume. When we were talking about base, we were encouraging people to build a solid foundation and a base. The rule of thumb we gave was that you might get to 80% of your peak in the base phase. And then the ideal goal in the aerobic strength phase is to go from 80% to 100%, We want you to, by the end of this phase, get to that max weekly volume. Now, some people may not get there, especially if they're newer to it, or maybe they started their cycle late and for scheduling reasons, they're kind of shortcutting some things. But in an ideal world, whether you're new or intentionally or not intentionally shortcutting things, you would get to your peak week in this phase of work, which is sooner than you often see in a lot of the standard builds you see online, where oftentimes somebody might peak their volume as they're peaking their long run or as they have their biggest week 3 or 4 or 5 weeks out from race day. So that's important. Continue to build that volume 2 to 4 miles a week, get to the peak. In particular, make sure you're getting that long run to its peak in this phase in order to make it work with the intensity that we'll talk about adding. We've already talked about adding is you got to continue to make sure those easy days are easy so that it all fits together in a way that works. So volume, still build, still important. Anything I'm missing there?
No. And I'm sorry, I got a little ahead on that last one.
Yeah,
I forgot
no,
would go there, but yeah.
It's okay.
It was a natural thought in the moment.
Yeah, it was the perfect segue, really. So I liked it. And it actually prompted me to reorder our bullets here just so we get it in the right priority, because volume is still king here. Now, one thing I want to talk about, kind of a question somebody might ask if they're listening, is like, okay, well, what if I end up with a situation because of my calendar and, I've got a race already scheduled. I didn't have enough time to build the base that I wanted to get to 80%. And I'm entering the strength phase, maybe a little behind, but I need to enter that strength phase so that, I can follow the rules. What would you tell that person who's kind of playing catch up on volume as they enter this phase?
I would further reduce the priority of the quality. So I'm still going to have, I would still have them going through qualities, but I might flatten them a little bit across the aerobic strength phase. And I would still keep inching that up. And I would, in the same manner that we always do, no big leaps or bounds. I would still keep using the fundamentals and just say, we may not peak as high as you would have liked originally, but this is a long continuum that all fits together. So it's not like a negotiation that it can be like, okay, cool. Like, I understand. And based on your reasoning, my empathy's kicking in and I'll just trade you. It's not a negotiation. These are physiological systems. This is the human body.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would still keep inching volume up in an incremental manner, keep the strides going. And then, yeah, with the qualities themselves, they just may not reach as robust, or
you're not getting to ATLT3.
Yeah.
You pull back on the intensity of workouts, which underscores the point, which is that volume is still king, right? So we still prioritize that. And if you're behind, then that means we can't deprioritize volume to insert speed at that point. That's a trade-off that's not worth it, or that you don't win, And so volume still stays. It becomes a priority. You continue to ramp that. And then the quality workouts that we'll describe here in a minute get pulled back so that you can manage the volume still without getting hurt along the way, because you're trying to do too many things at once. So it's just a good reminder of what's important, especially at this stage in the game. So don't ever rush to workouts without the appropriate volume under your belt. That is a recipe for injury. It's a recipe for plateauing. It's a recipe for not getting what you want on race day. And it's a recipe for a short career in the sport. Just saying it the most blunt way I can.
Yeah. It made me think of the ordering of things. And I think I have an athlete that trains in my group on Wednesdays. They just did an entire remodel in their house, and we're talking about the frustrations. And I think anyone that's ever done a remodel knows it can get frustrating. And so in that spirit, that just because the electrician's behind and hasn't put the wiring in the walls, which has to happen before you put the walls up, which has to happen before you put the cabinets up, which has to happen before you go in and start painting the cabinets, right? So you wouldn't hire your cabinet painting team to come in early.
Right.
You like in that visual setting, people would be like, that's so logical. Duh, I would never do something stupid like that.
Yeah, let's paint the cabinets while they're still on the ground over here and we haven't been put up yet. That's what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. But with training, I'm like, this is as logical to us as that example is to a general contractor or anyone who's paid a general contractor to remodel their home.
Right.
Like, this is not some like woo-woo magic, conceptual, interesting ideation that you and I are playing around with. We're just trying to pass on the facts.
This is decades of experience.
Someone smarter than us figured it out. So we read about it. We tried it on. We're passing it to you.
For decades, yeah. But it's a good reminder, and we joke, and maybe we're a little direct about how we're saying it, but it is that important. Like, we emphasize it and we joke about it and we say it bluntly because it is that important. And you're not different. Speaking to you, if you're looking into the camera, or you, whatever you're listening to, you're not different. If you're behind, don't be tempted to take shortcuts here. Reset, rebuild the volume, or build the volume the first time before you start layering in a bunch of intensity. It's the way. It is the way. Okay, so volume is king still. Building that to 100% during this phase. Second thing is you still have sharpening work. So we keep that throughout. We've talked about it before, but strides stay always. Basically, outside of recovery weeks, there's a place for strides where you're doing that at least once a week, ideally in our world after the medium long run, but could be after another recovery run during the week. Strides stay always. Another thing we like to do is keep priming work, I'll call it. You might call it sharpening work. Keep sharpening work in all phases, regardless of what you're training for. We typically slot those sharpening, priming type workouts into down weeks. So, our program typically has a 2 up week, 1 down week cycle so that you can build for 2 weeks, recover, and consolidate that fitness for a week. And so we often like to keep that priming work, that sharpening work in the down weeks so that while volume is lower again, because you're cycling volume down by 15 to 25%, we can keep that high intensity work there. Again, typically with plenty of recovery, so you're not taxing the aerobic system too much, but that stays always in this phase and certainly in the race specific phase. And then the third thing is, obviously, we've already started talking about it. The workouts look like a certain thing in this aerobic strength phase. And I think in many ways, the defining characteristics of these phases is often, what do the quality workouts look like? At least that's what everybody wants to focus on. And we've already given some examples, but now let's talk through that in a little bit more depth. The oversimplification I like to use is, there's kind of 2 types of workouts in the strength phase. And one of them is that lactate processing type of workout that's focused typically between aerobic threshold and lactate threshold. Some people generally call that tempo effort type of work, or zone 4 sometimes is what you'll hear people talk about, where you're doing those types of workouts in this phase. And then you're also doing in this phase more aerobically challenging hill workouts, because hill work is, as Frank Shorter used to say, speed work in disguise. It allows you to ramp up the intensity of quality without the same taxing nature on the musculoskeletal system. And there is a muscular strength and kind of power component to it, while also being a really good venue for building aerobic strength. So hill workouts and kind of general threshold or tempo type work is the broadest brush categories of what you might see in this phase outside of those strides and sharpening work.
Should I get into examples? Or
get into examples.
I'm thinking
wherever you're going,
like,
but yeah, let's go some examples on each type.
Okay. Well, one, these should be done in progressive orders too. I was also thinking, I'm glad that you mentioned the down week, like working 5K pace or, those sharpening exercises. And then or workouts. I like to think of the 2-week combination of things. And so if the 2 up weeks, I know I'm going after aerobic strength, but I like one to lean like general and broad. Like let's take this like 35 minutes at AT working down to LT. Let's say that was in up week 1. Well, in up week 2, I might like to do something like 6 to 8 by a K, where the middle K is like at half marathon pace, but they started a little slower and they worked down. And so with it being a K, they get a little taste of what precision is like, even though I know we said this is not about precision. I'm just mixing in different components where it's like I've got a progressive pace, each at a K, and then they're targeting numbers within that. Whereas the week before, the pace range could have been pretty broad. And so I give them similar workouts in similar zones, pretty much doing the same way, but we're testing that system from different approaches. One with short recoveries across Ks, the other one being very continuous.
Yeah.
And I felt like another example that came to mind that I like to use in this phase is one that we got from Coach Jen Harney, who used to coach our team row group out in Cedar Park. And she titled it the Lumberjack Twist. And I feel like it fits all 3 of our criteria. It's the only workout I think that hits all of them, where it is it's going to have the endurance component and the AT component. It's going to have hills, and it's going to be a combo workout. Right.
Yep.
And so, if someone was new, you could have them do 3 to 5 hill sprints, 10 to 15 minutes of AT in the middle. And then, did I say 3 to 5? 3 to 5 hill sprints on the back end. Someone a little more advanced might do something like 5 to 7 of those sprints, 20 at AT, and then followed up by 5 to 7. So that's hitting the actual strength of hill repeat and everything. It's neuromuscular recruitment. That's also speed development. And then also the whole sort of surrounding theme of that workout is aerobic endurance, because legs are getting fatigued on the front end. They've got to hold their AT pace in the middle, and then they just get that last zap at the end to recruit fast twitch fibers. So that's almost like a little bonus. You don't have to go for all of that in a workout, but that's an example of a pretty well-designed workout hitting 3 different components.
And the thing about the hills is, they're often there to just generate fatigue, so that you get a little bit tired, things start to break down maybe a little bit. Then you got to go into this sub-maximal effort, be AT or LT, whatever it may be, for whatever window of time. So you've got to manage the fatigue generated inside that effort, which isn't like maximum, but it is challenging in some way. And so being able to deal with that fatigue, find that groove anyway, stay in that groove, relax through it. I mean, that's in essence what we're trying to do in most long races, is just manage fatigue better. And so a shortcut to generate fatigue in this phase is do hill reps, and then combine that in some form with some longer or interval based threshold type work. One that I call hills plus tempo that we do over here on Windsor Hill here in Austin. We'll do 2 or 3 hill reps, which is about 300 meters. So hard up, easy down, hard being the effort, no defined pace, hard up, easy down, hard up, easy down. And then we have an 800 meter loop at the top that they'll do a tempo effort, and basically very little recovery. 2 hills, maybe 1 minute rest at the top before they go right into tempo at 8. And a tempo 8 is short enough, if you're truly going tempo effort, that you can take that fatigue generated by the hill and sort of figure it out and manage it. And then you get recovery by running back down the hill and starting again. And so it's actually a continuously moving workout that hits all of those elements as well. One of my favorites to give out.
I guess it hits all 3 as well. It's combo, it's hills, it's also love the I can't remember. I think this is in the book, but I don't know what chapter we put it in the book, but like Hilly Julia. And Julia is a workout that you may know the history. I do. I showed up to you tell it then. I don't know how it got the name.
Julia workout named after an elite athlete who's still around as a coach, Julia Stamps Malone. now. Her married name is Malone, but Julia Stamp's maiden name. She ran with Carmen. Actually, they would train together for a little window of time. Carmen being one of our coaches, competed at a very high level back in the day. And so that workout was stolen by Carmen from Julia and then subsequently stolen by Rogue from Carmen and named the Julia after the original kind of inventor, so to speak, of it. But yeah, we love various forms of the Julia. We also have a version that we call the Romeo, affectionately, kind of the kind of not sister, I guess, brother workout to the Julia. But the Julia is you can do a flat version, you can do a hilly version, but basically you do some timed fartlek, typically at the beginning, which will be a 1-1 or a 2-2 hard, easy, 1 minute on, 1 minute easy, or 2 minutes on, 2 minutes easy for anywhere from 16 to 20 minutes. Take a recovery. And then using that as the fatigue generating appetizer, that kind of fartlek potentially on hills, you then have to do 20 minutes, 16 to 20 minutes tempo on the backside. So managing that fatigue generated in the first segment so that you can hold that tempo effort in the second segment. That might be one of my favorite workouts to give, to do. It's just kind of fun. And I think it's also a good confidence booster in this phase of work because you go into the tempo feeling really primed because you've got the 1-1s in you. And it's almost like when you start the tempo, you're like, you go too fast. That's the tendency because you've been doing 5K effort on the 1 minute on. So you kind of have to hold yourself back so you don't overdo it. And if you do that appropriately, then you actually have really good appetizer to a solid tempo run by doing it that way. Not to say that it's easy, but I find that, I don't know, it flows well, I guess I should say.
It's appropriate.
It's appropriate. So that's another favorite. We have other examples in the book if you want to dig in on this, but these are bread and butter workouts and they don't have to be complicated. We've talked about some complicated ones, lumberjack twist, hills plus tempo, but also, 4 miles at aerobic threshold, 3 miles tempo. Like these are bread and butter workouts that don't have to be complicated, that just hit bullseye on the target for this zone of work or this phase of work. So there you go. Those are some examples, but again, kind of the three components of the strength phase: building volume, trying to get to that max volume, keeping that sharpening work in the strides, which stay with us always, and then layering in these aerobic strength-oriented workouts to this phase of work, kind of 6 to 8 weeks after the base phase, priming you for the race-specific phase to come, which we'll talk about, I think, next week, if I remember the flow appropriately. So there you go. That's what we got. What should we wrap this one with? Any final thoughts on the aerobic strength phase that you want to leave them with?
Relax and stay controlled, and then also keep perspective. So I like to relax and stay controlled because yes, you're increasing intensity, but that should be the guiding thought. And then I guess because we went on a little bit of a tangent of reminding them like where they're at in the cycle and how volume's still going up, it's like I just want to give that reminder of keep all things in perspective. Like just because we talked about aerobic strength workouts today, don't go take those as like, ooh, I know the new cool workout that everyone should do, but rather this is an appropriate kind of workout or set of workouts that are in the middle of your training, nested inside a whole program that's pointing somewhere. So keep the perspective is all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's good advice. Always know where you are, which determines how you should be approaching each phase of work. So a good thought. We'll wrap it there. A few reminders before we shut it down. One, you can get our book if you want to follow along via the chapters. Again, today was about 11, but we're going through each one of these. You can get that on our Instagram page if you go to @RogueRunning, click on the links in the bio, and you can buy both a hardback and a paperback version there. Secondly, check out our website, roguerunning.com. If you're interested in training with us, we've got programs in person in Dallas and Austin areas. And then obviously we have our virtual groups as well and virtual one-on-one options. All of that's on our website if you want to check it out. And then we'd love to hear you on Friday. Join us for Q&A on Instagram Live. Just follow us at Rogue Running and 2 p.m. Central on Fridays. That's where we'll be. We always have really good questions, so it's also just entertaining to pop in. But if you have a question for us, that would be a good venue to ask it. All right. So with that, we'll wrap this one, episode 396. We'll talk to you guys next week.